Okay, so I think we can start now. Welcome to today's webinar, MDR and XDR, a consolidated approach to a fully managed threat detection and response program. We will learn today how MDR and XDR can help organizations reach their full cybersecurity potential. My name is Ana Diacono. I'm a marketing program manager at Bitdefender, and I will be your host today. It's my pleasure to welcome our two speakers, Jayden Montero, Senior Director of Product Management, and Erin Meyer, Senior Manager of Product Marketing. Now, before we start, just a few housekeeping rules. Please note that you are muted as we are recording this webinar, and we will provide access to the recording within the next couple of days after this session. And throughout the session, we encourage you to ask your questions in the Q&A chat box, because at the end of the presentations, we are going to host a short Q&A session. And now, over to you, Erin.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, everyone, for joining. As Anna said, I'm Erin Myers, the Senior Manager of Product Marketing at Bitdefender. And, you know, Jade and I always like to share kind of a fun fact about ourselves that's kind of relevant to the presentation. So my fun fact, I must confess, I have paid regular avocado prices for organic avocados. I mean, when avocados are like $3, I'm just going to pay the regular price. Hand it off to Jayden to learn his fun fact.
Hey everybody, my name is Jayden Cruz Montero. I'm the Senior Director of Product Management and lead MDR at Bitdefender here with Erin. And my fun fact, Erin and I were discussing this week kind of like our retail, white sins. And I remember being a little kid walking out of a grocery store eating Sour Patch Kids, and my parents knocking out of my hand, forcing me to go back, apologize, and give money back to the cashier. I promise this fact will be relevant here, but it's a pleasure to meet all of you. We're excited to talk about the interaction today between MDR and XDR.
All right, so what are we going to talk about today? First, the role of XDR in modern security operations. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the challenges of having an XDR solution and successfully implementing that XDR solution, as well as diving into MDR and how it benefits resource-strapped organizations. And finally, how MDR for XDR can help organizations reach their full cybersecurity potential. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to Jayden.
All right, let's get right into it. It feels like it's already been about 4 or 5 years, and webinar after webinar, we still have to start from the same grounding principles about the blank DR acronyms, and that's key for a couple of reasons. I mean, but I think the most important one is the vendors have done, you guys on the call, practitioners, not a lot of favors when it comes to blank detection and response. A lot of people are waiting for the analysts, Gartner, Forrester, et cetera, to publish their yearly reports, their buyer's guide, to show you how the meta is changing around detection and response, and to help define those categories. Instead, Erin and myself often look to Twitter, where the more colorful conversations between these analysts occur, and we often are looking at kind of the bleeding edge conversations around acronyms. And we wanted to start today's presentation here. When we in this room today are thinking about XDR, in my opinion, it's most helpful to think about it as stemming from a core problem that practitioners were facing. As Peter Firstbrook here says, at its highest level, XDR was a cry for help from mid-sized organizations that couldn't afford any kind of IR capabilities with their current tools. I'm sure his colleagues at Gartner or other analysts would say it's not just about IR, but it's about being able to use your current tooling, which was very, very fragmented at something like a mid-sized organization, and be able to get real outcomes out of those things. When the average enterprise portfolio is about 75 security tools on average, it's really, really difficult to think about how to combine all of that data together to push your security program forward. I love when he says here, the approach that will win will depend on the vendors who get it. So that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. What is Bitdefender's approach to XDR? What is our approach to manage detection and response? Let's kill the acronyms, let's pull them apart, and make sure that when everybody leaves the room today, we understand what it means to do a good job at detection and response, and how you can push your security posture forward. To do that, And I said, I promised we'd make our fun fact here a little bit relevant to the presentation. As Aaron and I were thinking about, our sins, how was I able to walk out of a store blatantly eating Sour Patch Kids out of my hand as I walked through the front door? We were thinking about an analog to XDR. How do we demystify that DNR equation? And we didn't have to look very far. It turns out that retail and security in the world of retail has come a really long way in the past couple of decades. And that's for good reason. If I told you some of the stats around retail crime, you'd be shocked at how similar it sounds to cybersecurity. Right now, we are going through what people call, or what researchers call, the perfect storm of retail crime. There are some factors like COVID, the introduction of self-checkout, some supply chain challenges, rising inflation that are causing theft to go up. And probably in your mind, what you're thinking is an image of me, walking out of a store with Sour Patch Kids. But it turns out that organized retail crime, is starting to account for a major portion of retail shrinkage. That is, goods kind of disappearing from shelves. And so technology has kept up. Back when I stole those Sour Patch Kids, 20, 30 years ago, cameras were already in place, and still today, cameras at the perimeter and inside stores continue to be the cheapest way to get returns on any kind of retail security program. But technology has introduced other improvements as well. You can imagine things like electronic article surveillance, being able to tag individual products and say, when are these things leaving the store? And then you get the evolution of these things, and it's easy to see the corollary from these kinds of technologies to cybersecurity. What used to just be a perimeter game, being able to look at your firewall, who's coming in and out of your store, became an endpoint-based game. What are attackers doing when they get onto your individual endpoints, when they are walking through your aisles? Even more recently, you see the evolution of things like point-of-sale security. Are you able to abuse endpoints or workstations in the retail world, cash registers, where sales actually happen? But something was still missing from the security equation. If it's true that this technology was able to account for the rise in organized crime, why is it that organized crime costs small businesses about $800 per incident today, that in 2020, it cost us about $1 billion, which is an increase of about 50% in organized crime over the past 5 years? That's because there was a missing piece to this equation. So if we expand and take a step back from just technology, we'll notice that there was another evolution in retail security, and that was people. It's funny because retail security started with people. You can think presence in stores, people being able to ask what shoppers are looking for. And you can think about dedicated security guards. Well, today you're seeing that start to go digital with the introduction of what's being called virtual security guards. I suppose you guys all can see where this is going. The analog here for cybersecurity is managed detection and response. Is it enough to just purchase technologies to start monitoring all these different things in your environment? From an XDR perspective, we can branch out to a bunch of different kinds of assets that we're now monitoring, a bunch of different data sources. But if you don't have the talent and expertise to monitor those different systems, you're still left in as vulnerable a place as when you started. So I'd like for everybody in this room to bear that in mind as we continue today's presentation. Hopefully that gives us a good grounding to start thinking about XDR as a set of technologies. You can think about all the different things that you could buy to defend your store, or in this case, our organizations, and manage detection and response as the people layer. How are you going to make sure that you're staffing the right people with the right level of expertise to get the most out of your investments? And with that, I already explained some of those, I guess, tailwinds to organized crime. Aaron, what are some of the problems in our world that make it so that we're not keeping up with the way that attackers behave today?
Sure. Thanks, Jaden. So I'm sure a lot of you on this call, none of these particular market problems are going to be unique and different and something that you haven't heard before or suffered from before. But the moral is a lot of organizations today still have one or more of these issues that they deal with on a daily basis. The skills gap is incredibly prevalent, especially after COVID. Organizations have little or no expertise. If they have the resources to hire security expertise, they don't have a lot of resources, and they end up hiring a security generalist as opposed to a security specialist. There's too few resources to scale 24/7, and they can't keep up the mantle of a full-fledged detection and response system, basically, without those resources. We also have substantial tool complexity. We all know our attack surfaces, with the rise of digital transformation, they've increased. And there's too many tools and too little knowledge around how to use those tools effectively. The attack surface, like I said, has increased, and we just frankly can't keep up. Alert fatigue. If you have an EDR solution, potentially you're getting a lot of alerts, but do those alerts have context? There's always challenges when you're prioritizing alerts by severity, and the time spent managing those alerts takes away from more strategic business initiatives. And lastly, insufficient response capabilities. Even if you have the ability to prioritize alerts from your EDR tool, do you have the resources in place to respond in a holistic fashion that maintains your organization's cyber resilience? A lot of organizations don't have that capability today. So what are we looking at? So nowadays, many organizations are starting to understand that they need greater visibility. So they're collecting as much data as possible, frequently adding multiple point security solutions. And this is understandably to make sure they have their bases covered, as few blind spots as possible. So while they may have some type of packet capture, endpoint, or cloud data, it's all happening in silos with narrow fields of focus. This means organizations are being flooded with information from individual data sources with absolutely no correlation across them. That means a lot of data, little context. Every new point solution that is introduced requires added expertise with the security team. And even when that expertise exists, some organizations have that ability, those individuals are probably drowning still in data, unable to separate important alerts from false alarms. This is the noise we speak of. They don't have the ability to recognize the connecting data points between each function. In fact, additional point solutions may, in some cases, have an inverse effect on the effectiveness of a security team. Each new point product adds an additional layer of complexity and additional variables that should be correlated with other data, and making correlation orders of magnitude more difficult with each new data set. However, that's not to say that more data isn't good. In fact, the more information available relative to a particular event, the more effective both the analysis and response can be. We need the data, but it's making us less effective because the requirements simply exceed human capabilities. We cannot effectively sort through and react to the massive amount of enterprise security information. Certainly not with the speed that's required to keep up with the threats that we've talked about. So the market problems we are addressing, they're not new ones. Organizations need to protect an ever-increasing attack surface with more devices, identities, and data across a growing and heterogeneous infrastructure as it is targeted by those innovative attack techniques. Over time, this has led security teams adding additional technology to the problem. This has just exacerbated the situation and tipped the scales in favor of the attackers. So defenders are now left with overwhelmed security teams, a lack of visibility, siloed data, disparate security technologies, and too many screens and too many alerts. Which brings me to the next slide. So, like I said, the market problems we're addressing aren't new. Organizations need to protect themselves and protect their ever-increasing attack surface with more devices, identities, and data across that growing and heterogeneous infrastructure. In a hyper-connected world that we live in, where cyber attackers seek to do harm 24/7, organizations face unpredictable risk, and becoming cyber resilient is always the ultimate goal. Enter XDR. But what is XDR? You know, it entered the lexicon in about 2018, and if you just Google XDR and pull up all the articles, it's a variety of things. I mean, it sounds like the golden ticket, essentially. But in order to kind of baseline and reset that, according to Gartner, XDR is an emerging technology that can offer improved threat prevention, detection, and response capabilities for security operations teams. To us, more specifically at Bitdefender, XDR is the evolution of EDR, which provides more efficient and effective threat detection, investigation, and response in real time. What XDR does is it unifies security-relevant endpoint detections with telemetry from security and business tools to enable organizations to identify threats, understand the full impact, find the root cause, and take immediate response to minimize business damage. Just how sticky is this XDR technology? Gartner says it's estimated by the end of 2027, XDR will be used by 40% of end user organizations for purposes of vendor consolidation and threat detection and response programs. That's up from less than 5% today.
Aaron, I think one of the interesting things that you said there is when you say that XDR is an evolution on EDR. From my perspective, there are a couple of reasons why that's the case. One of them is because EDR was always was traditionally the richest source of telemetry that we could get on attackers and what they're doing. You know, previously the issue was we knew that an attacker could breach the perimeter, and then we had no idea what was going on inside, outside of like network intrusion detection and host intrusion detection stuff. Endpoint gave us that visibility. But the second thing that it did was it allowed us to stitch together a picture of what the attacker was doing and what the attacker was after. Something in the MDR world we just say is root cause analysis. And XDR as an evolution of that just says, as we take in more data sources, let's add to that picture. We're not radically reforming anything. So I really appreciate the notes you just shared. We want to bring this to a ground level, to the ground floor for you guys. So I just wanted to show you our opinion very, very clearly. And when you translate or map our opinion to the stack itself, this is what you get. Our platform, GravityZone XDR, covers what is now being called kind of like the analyst experience. On the far left-hand side, you'll have the way we do collection. Lightweight sensors that are very easy to install that then, again, beef up your understanding of what an attacker is doing. We're going to talk a lot more about those sensors moving forward, so I'll leave that for now. As you guys look across this beautiful Beehive cloud, what you'll find here is a set of features that allow you as a team, as a security team, to be supercharged. From detection into correlation, you don't have to really care about the way that individual data points or logs are coming into your security team. Instead, from the first time that you see an incident in that visualized column, there's a summary and an overview about what happened. Everything is pre-correlated, as you can see in the column previous. As you move into the investigation and response stages, you're focusing a lot more of your time on getting to know the nitty-gritty about an incident, and then also choosing which avenue you'd like to go down to respond or to contain or to remediate, instead of spending your time on the far left here. Did we have the right signatures? Do we have the right threat intelligence? Is everything correlated? Or do I have to spend the first 2 hours of an investigation stitching together my cloud logs with my network logs, with my endpoint logs, with my identity logs? So hopefully this gives a really high level view of our opinion, but we're gonna go a lot deeper. And one thing we wanted to reflect on is why. I mean, why do we even spend the effort to make sure that we can provide that suite of capabilities you saw on the last slide? Well, one thing that Gartner espoused in their market guide for extended detection and response in 2021 were the various improvements to your security team when you're using XDR technology. And to briefly, highlight some of these, you can think about combining weak signal from multiple components as being one of the bigger improvements of having an XDR stack. If you recall that defense in depth strategy that we were showing with retail stores, the same is true of your organization. When you think about buying a best-in-breed solution, it is taking a single lens and a single look, a perspective at the way your organization looks. But the weaker signals from those might benefit weak signals from a different application, a different security tool. And XDR can get benefits from combining that data at the ground floor instead of, again, pulling detections together at the top level from those different tools. Obviously, that fifth point there, that you're integrating only the required relevant data, also becomes important. It's not just about promoting weak signal to strong signal. It's also about saying we know that this data is relevant in one tool because we're no longer taking guesses outside of that tool. Instead of saying, hey, we saw a detection at your firewall, maybe you can see something on the endpoint where that attacker landed, you can just check. You can just pull that data together. And I think importantly, and sometimes oft ignored, if you're looking at that sixth improvement there, centralized configuration is important too. If you think about the IT burden of deploying your best-in-breed tools and maintaining them on a yearly basis, or even less in some cases, like monthly, it's very difficult to do that stuff if it's not centralized. And we're going to talk a lot about the impacts of having a centralized configuration as we move forward. But for now, I'll pass it to Aaron. If XDR is so impactful, if it's so helpful as a promise or as a technology platform that's been realized, Aaron, what are some of the what is the major challenge to seeing this adopted everywhere at every organization?
Absolutely. So, I mean, up until this point, it's like XDR is this amazing technology that answers all your problems. Not completely. So what you see here is some research from ESG, and it says that XDR as a standalone is not necessarily what organizations are looking for. In this particular study, 50% of respondents are actually interested in fully managed XDR, or another phrase for that is MDR for XDR. So what they found was security professionals needs hands-on help to fully realize the robust feature set that XDR provides. Yes, XDR is an emerging technology that promises to deliver a more unified and efficient approach to prevent, detect, and respond to threats. But what if you don't have the internal resources and expertise to do so? MDR services are a credible overlay for a detection and response technology like XDR. These services are designed to remove complexity for the organization and add a fundamental layer of human intelligence and interpretation to what is frequently a very complex set of technology-driven findings. Organizations without the internal skill sets and understanding necessary to be effective in processing the outcomes XDR delivers require a service overlay. That service overlay comes in the form of managed detection and response.
All right, now that we've introduced two acronyms to you guys officially, managed detection and response, and then XDR, extended detection and response, just wanted to take a pause to make sure that the picture is totally clear. How do these two things interact? And we're going to spend about 2 minutes with the best illustration, again, in my opinion, being Twitter, the paragon of where the avant-garde conversations happen around detection and response. I loved this thread that happened between a couple of Forrester analysts and some practitioners here saying, what about managed XDR? Is that a new acronym? Is it just MDR? And Jeff's approach here is sound, makes a lot of sense to us here at Bitdefender, and we really love the way he explained this. There's a fight ongoing to not add more acronyms. As security leaders, we just need better capabilities. Remember, this was born from a cry of help. That was the Peter Firstbrook phrasing from the first slide. What we want as practitioners is better music, not more genres. And as we continue to evolve this discussion, Ali, another Forrester analyst here, added her contribution, which made this very clear. XDR is a product, MDR is a service. And hopefully, again, that retail store picture helped to really paint that idea, right? To really make it clear that what we're talking about here is the combination of a human service layer and technologies. Also love the Twitter drama. All right, and lastly here, should MDRs be looking at adding XDR to their arsenal? Jeff says, probably the best answer here, not just should they be looking at it, but that the definition of MDR has already included, it was already intrinsic to what became XDR from our earliest research on the topic. If you go back to the early days of managed security services operating in the perimeter, it wasn't that managed security service providers did not want to look at other data sources. In fact, managed SOC, right? Bringing in a SIM and pulling in all log sources is a service that a lot of MSSPs still provide. That being said, taking an approach from the endpoint out, being able to focus on the core tasks of detection and response and not just alert triage are all hallmarks of MDR. And so we really agree with Jeff here that our definition of MDR at Bitdefender already should include XDR as a technology platform. Hopefully that's very clear, because what we're going to do now is have Aaron talk about what the benefits are of having that connection. And then I'll spend a lot of this presentation showing you guys a couple of discrete benefits of working with a vendor like Bitdefender, where you see a combination of that service layer and the core technology. Aaron, I'll give it to you.
All right, thanks. So, you know, we're now marrying XDR with MDR, and what does that look like? What are the value propositions around the marriage of our Bitdefender MDR for our GravityZone XDR? As you can see on this slide, there are 5 value props. I'm going to focus on the first 2 because the first 2 kind of enable the preceding value tops. So this solution observes attacks and advanced threats while consolidating monitoring across the business, be it physical devices, virtual assets, connected devices, or cloud platforms and workloads. This value prop is all about that extended visibility that you get with XDR, and MDR, the capability to actually use it. The solution also provides out-of-the-box detection of advanced threats, which protects the organization from day one while enabling customized detections for your unique use cases to provide incident and alert triage, reducing investigation efforts and increasing security operations efficiency. Our XDR comes with industry-leading prevention and detection methods applied to a broad set of data sources. With Bitdefender MDR for GravityZone XDR, we utilize all of that prevention and detection methods and ingest those data sources. We've developed a multi-tier correlation and detection algorithms delivered both locally to the sensor and at the cloud platform level. We are not reliant on other security vendors' technologies for detections, which is really important. So these 2 value pillars enable the next 2. The deep visibility and out-of-box detections we get enable our SOC to take response actions on your behalf. So Bitdefender MDR for GravityZone XDR reduces the investigation and response time by automatically providing the necessary context to gain visibility and understanding of the root cause at the organizational level. MDR for XDR also enables rapid end-to-end breach response by combining fully automated and guided response recommendations across the organization. With XDR, our SOC will automatically build the root cause analysis and contextualize it with automated and guided investigations of incidents. Lastly, but not least, Bitdefender MDR for GravityZone XDR provides ease of use. You can actually be confident that you are fully executing on all of the robust feature sets that XDR provides because a team of experts is essentially doing it for you. So not only is it easy to use, but the accelerated time to value is also substantial. There's also no need for custom integrations or third-party security tools. So now that I've introduced you to the marriage of MDR and XDR, Jaden's going to dive a little bit deeper into an overview of MDR specifically.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. We just hate to go through a full webinar and not give a little bit more meat. I really hope that, I understand there's a huge spectrum likely of attendees here from technical all the way to budget owners, but more on the non-technical side. So one of the things we wanted to do though is show just a little bit of the meat so we can get some substantive questions. especially as it pertains to what we mean by an XDR stack and a little bit more about what our MDR team looks like. So this will be quick, it will be rapid fire, but hopefully it'll be fun and helpful for those of you on the call. So let's talk a little bit about MDR. What does that look like? For us, we offer, at Bitdefender, we offer a service whose hallmark is, it can be summarized in one word, customizability. And I'll dive into that in some detail and why that's important. But if you're thinking about what makes Bitdefender managed detection and response a little different than what you see in the rest of the market, it's the attention we pay to understanding our customers on a very granular level, on almost a molecular level. We call that customizability. In addition, to get a little bit more of an understanding of the topography of our SOC, we currently run out of 2 security operations centers, one in San Antonio and one by our headquarters in Bucharest. And our MDR delivers 3 core capabilities. One is 24/7 monitoring and response, and a big R on that response. What I mean by capital R is the ability to take containment action on our customers' behalf, regardless of the time of day. It's not a glorified alerting layer. It's not something where we need to get a hold of you before we do it. It's an onboarding process that lets us understand what kind of actions we can take in your environment to make us comfortable to be able to do that any time of day. We leverage a vast amount of threat intel, and we generate a vast amount of threat intel fusion on the bottom right-hand side, which benefits our third capability, our threat hunting. We are able to continuously monitor the global threat landscape and use our understanding not just of your environment, but of all of our customers to be able to scope and then hunt in customer environments. And this is akin to an honestly dying, very overloaded term, threat hunting, that we still really hold very dear to our hearts, that there is real value to thinking about the global threat landscape, to making hypotheses about what your environment in particular would look like if compromised, and then being able to prove that hypothesis or disprove it. Okay, with that overview, I want to show you just conceptually what it means for our MDR to operate on top of the XDR stack that Aaron's been talking about. The picture in January of this year, before our XDR technologies were generally available, looked like this. Again, harken back to that grocery store analogy here. You can imagine all we had were display case locks or individual barcodes on items. We still had a really good idea of what was going on because every single item was something we were paying attention to. So we were pulling in endpoint telemetry and detections from all of the endpoints we were monitoring in our customer environments. On the flip side, if we wanted to take an action, there's almost nothing better than being able to do so on the endpoint. You know, being able to dynamically lock something that somebody is trying to steal out of or to thief out of. That is very direct and awesome, but you can see how substantially that picture enlarged with the release of our XDR sensors. Now, what we get from those sensors was pretty massive. So not just telemetry anymore, but getting a really good understanding of users and the way that we work. If you again rewind a couple of months, we would say things like in the SOC, we would say, hey, we saw a detection on an endpoint, we saw some suspicious user behavior. Would you be able to go check in Office 365 if that user has been acting suspiciously? And today, all of that activity is automatically being pulled back from the SOC. Cloud activity, anything regarding your workloads in the cloud, SharePoint activity, any productivity applications like email or SharePoint. You can imagine like filter rules being changed. We already see all that stuff without having to do outreach to the customer, which ultimately informs our picture and idea of your user's normal behavior. Of course, it's not just about visibility, as I've already mentioned, it's also about response. So I come from, my background is security orchestration and automation, and in about 2015 or so, 2016, the most popular low impact actions that one could take in their environment were password resets and deletion of emails. Happy to say that those things are now available via the Bitdefender portfolio. It's really easy to take low effort, but high impact from a containment perspective, and then low impact from a business perspective, actions like password resets and deletion of email. Doesn't take very much for Aaron or myself to go set our passwords again when we wake up in the morning, but if we're able to offload that risk of the fact that an attacker could have compromised our accounts by resetting that password overnight, it's almost always worth that trade. All right, the other thing that we're able to do, not just from pulling in telemetry or just responding given those integrations, is answer some questions in the course of our investigations that speed up investigation time itself. Showing you some examples of that, you can look at that email portion here. Who else received a certain email or similar threats? Are there compromised accounts sending internal phishing emails? When every single minute counts and an attacker can expand the blast radius from one user to potential 50 others via phishing emails in the span of an hour, it's really, really crucial that we're not doing unneeded outreach back up to the customer, and instead that we are doing this analysis in-house. Similar thing down here if you look at identity. If we're able to say, hey, we see some interaction between your on-premise AD server and an endpoint, but we're not able to see exactly how that server was messed with, then we're missing a lot of visibility. Instead, we should be able to see the interaction between how identities are changing on that on-premise installation versus the activity that we're seeing on the endpoints. So when we talk about supercharging the SOC, it's about speeding up investigation time. And as we've talked about also, it's about responding via those integrations. It's about actually deleting that email before it gets a chance to be opened by those other 50 people. Or it's about actually rolling that user's password or suspending the user before you go from one compromised user to 50 in the span of 30 minutes. Now that I've talked to you about the ways in which those technologies empower the SOC, Aaron, can you help inform these lovely folks of what the XDR sensors are that are available in our portfolio today?
Sure. So we're going to dive into specifics, and specifically with MDR for XDR, you get additional sensors than just the endpoint. You get cloud, identity, productivity apps, and network. This gives our SOC unprecedented visibility across the organization for detection and response purposes. By choosing MDR for XDR, organizations get all of the technology innovations, all of this data augmented by the threat hunting expertise of a fully staffed security operations center in San Antonio or Bucharest. And all of these analysts are certified and from global intelligence agencies. So they're the best of the best. So let's start with cloud first. The Cloud Center monitors activity on the security of cloud environments, such as AWS. It recognizes anomalies by establishing a baseline of normal behavior and identifying when activity deviates from the baseline. With the identity sensor, this identifies suspicious authentication activity for apps, DevOps tools, databases, systems, cloud environments, and other critical resources. It provides security teams with tools to allow disabling of suspicious accounts or forcing a credential reset for those accounts. With productivity apps, this detects attacks against or originating from Office 365 accounts and emails, while allowing security teams to respond directly, such as by deleting malicious emails, as Jaden said earlier. And lastly, network. This monitors network traffic for signs of attack, including lateral movement, data exfiltration attempts, port scans, and brute force attacks. So these are the 4 sensors that are available a la carte right now. We definitely plan on releasing additional sensors and making them available to organizations in the future.
Okay, last layer down, I promise. But we often get requests after seeing the previous slide or talking through that with folks like yourselves. Well, that's cool, but maybe I already have a cloud security solution. So what specifically are you looking at in terms of detections? And I'll just walk through a couple of these, right? Because I think one of both issues and opportunities as cybersecurity vendors is you do see a lot of overlap. And again, remember that the value here is not just that we're detecting some of these things, but that they can be stitched, pre-correlated with the data that we have from the rest of your environment before you see them. Nevertheless, let's look at some of these things. Being able to look at spear phishing attempts and create detections in our platform from them. Users receiving emails with URLs in the body where you see correlation between our endpoint detection and response tools and Office already. You can imagine an email coming in with the link and then seeing on the endpoint if somebody actually clicked it and if you saw download and execution of malware. A couple of other really interesting things that that attackers use to evade defenders like ourselves. You can see here things like changing permissions on mailboxes, creating filter rules, executable file upload to different accounts. And then you can see from an evasion perspective, also deletion, multiple emails deleted in non-owned mailboxes. For each of the sensors, as we've mentioned, there are a bunch of response actions. We throw this up today just to say, if you're there in the chat and you're curious about the capabilities of every sensor, absolutely feel free to reach out to us. We can send you something like this, talk through it in more detail. The last note I'd like to make is, we're powered by 400 plus R&D staff globally. That staff is dedicated wholly to always increasing the library of our detections based on the way that attackers themselves are improving their own capabilities. So you can expect to see our detections increase as vectors also change. A really good example of that, I had someone ask me 2 weeks ago, well, what detections do you have for Microsoft Teams? And that's literally an ongoing exercise with our labs team where they're saying, look, although we see that vector increasing in priority, we also see that it's not the major vector still compared to things like email. So as we monitor Teams as a vector, we're looking at maybe today more audit-based use cases, but as that moves into the future, maybe email becomes so locked down that attackers are looking at messaging apps like Slack and Teams as more of that vector. And so you should expect to see a proliferation of detections to match. That's a really fun dance that Bitdefender is proud to be a part of and we've been doing for 20 plus years. So we welcome your questions. Okay, we've already talked about how all the data in GravityZone, comes in stitched together from the start. And to give you kind of a sense of what that could look like, if you're a practitioner and you're thinking, well, what does this mean? When you look at an incident here in this screenshot, it'll give you a score that already represents all of the different data sources and all the events pulled from those data sources and the way that they work together. And that's very clear not only in the summary here, but in the organizational impact. You can see, for instance, in this screenshot, maybe there were 25 workstations or endpoints impacted, but there's also some email related data. And then there's also 3 users that were impacted, and then maybe 2 identity providers or servers. And it will also give you highlights of the activity across all those stitched together sources. By the time you see it as well, you can jump into the powerful graph, right? And in this graph, you'll be able to see a couple of things. You'll be able to see a clear outline of initial access and exit points, activity across all those resource types, and recommendations. So, I think most people are visual learners, and being able to look at an incident from a different perspective, not just logs, but from start to finish, from ingress to egress, what is the picture of what the attacker was trying to do? That is exactly what is available in our GravityZone XDR platform. And when you see the way that all those things interact, as our SOC, speaking from the perspective of Bitdefender MDR, it really speeds up the ability to paint a picture of, again, what the attacker did and what they were after. Last but not least, recommendations. The incident advisor will tell you, not only are you looking at this picture, but we advise you to take the following containment actions. And of course, if you are a purchaser of Bitdefender MDR, we are happy to take those on your behalf. All right, we're moving into the last portion of the presentation. Hopefully we take about the next 5 to 7 minutes here. And what we want to share with you guys are some of our learnings. What are the real advantages of consolidating detection and response as a job, not just as a technology, not just as a service, or if you have the internal team, your ability to use that technology. Let's talk about those advantages. There are going to be 3 we talk about today. The first is unparalleled local context. I'll talk about what that means in a second. The second is simplified signature management, mundane tasks that every SOC has to perform but doesn't necessarily want to. And finally, bi-directional feedback. What is the value of being able to pass detail internally back to your technology teams when you're the service operating out of that same vendor? Let's talk about local context. So when we onboard a customer, we gather about 50 plus data points on every single customer. It doesn't matter if you're Goldman Sachs or if you're a 5 endpoint florist. We are looking at your organization to understand enough to build a specific threat model for you. That is really key, because defense is very, very difficult if you're agnostic to the topography, to the internals of an organization. That thing is our customer questionnaire. So I say 50 plus data points because as we build those data points upwards based on your vertical, we will kind of branch, right? We'll say, hey, okay, you're in finances. Let us learn a little bit more about where your crown jewels are stored. Let us learn a little bit more about the compliance frameworks that you hold yourself to. We know that we're offering something that's pretty rare in this market, especially if costs have started spiraling out of control and it's been difficult to hire talent. We recently spoke to a Gartner analyst that gave us some pretty good feedback saying, look, it's never going to be equivalent to having someone living in the customer environment 24/7, but this is the closest you're going to get. And he was referring specifically to our customer questionnaire and the way that we conduct our onboarding. But I want to take you a little bit deeper into why this is important. What you guys should remember is that our SOC is trying to establish an idea, a data-driven idea of what normal looks like for customers. We start that process by taking customer-provided information and then using our various technologies to build every single customer a baseline. This is the part where we should pause and say, well, of course, with the additional telemetry coming from our XDR sensors, our ability to tell what's normal has now expanded outside of the home. Again, it's not just what do items look like behind the shelf, but what does the store look like when people are walking through the aisles? What days are we getting more foot traffic? When do doors open and when do they close? All these kinds of things are really important for us to understand what a normal profile looks like for your organization. And we're able to build on top of that new normal to be able to detect on two things, anomalies from the baseline and detections. And this is really interesting, right? Because the bottom one there, detections, are from technology. We say, okay, well, the technology found something that maps a technique, something that happened in your environment to a technique on the MITRE framework. Anomalies, on the other hand, are security agnostic. You don't need to understand anything about cybersecurity to say that, when Aaron and Jaden yesterday were trying to torrent the new episode of House of the Dragon, that was not normal behavior on our endpoints. So we will still trigger on those baseline anomalies. And again, with the expanded telemetry from our XDR sensors, that stuff, it gets exploded. The amount that we're able to understand what normal looks like is now vastly improved. That feeds our two teams, the cyber intelligence fusion cell here, who takes care of all of our threat intel-based activities, and our analyst team, active monitoring and response, and informs the way that we threat hunt and do our investigations. Of course, those things then allow us to complete this loop, to give you our recommendations and our response actions in a way that matters to you, not to all of our customers in general, right? If we understand that you're running a pen test, then it's important that we don't tell you stop scanning internally to your environment, because you'll say, well, yeah, but I told you guys I'd do a pen test in January, so we're not going to stop scanning right now. This whole picture is informed by the amount of data we get from your environment, which with XDR has only been beefed up to the max. The second improvement here, we'll just say, is simplified signature management. I come from a background where I was going SOC to SOC and automating a lot of their different processes. And it was a sad story seeing the status quo, because we spend a lot of our time as practitioners going from tool to tool and saying, what are the strong signal messages that we're getting from each of these tools? And then let's make sure that we can combine those things. I was pretty shocked looking at some of PurpleSec stats here. All credits PurpleSec here. And I'd love to play a game with the practitioners in the room about the percentage of organizations that fit into these three statistics. The first one, how many SIM rules are broken or never fire because there's misconfigured data sources and missing fields? Turns out 15%. And that's huge, right? Because if you spend a lot of your time trying to make up for broken SIM rules, you're not spending them on more proactive activities. In addition, how many organizations are actually using all the logs from their best in breed tools and pulling them together? 25%. That is the most staggering stat for me by far, and is good evidence that a consolidated platform like Bitdefender XDR is probably the right approach for more organizations, giving that cry for help. Hey, we don't have the right tools to pull together all that data. Well, if you're spending all of your time trying to pull together the data instead of investigating on top of it, you'll be in danger. And then lastly, 75% of rules provided by SIM vendors are disabled. So there's not a lot of out-of-the-box help. And this is just to say it's all bespoke. Here at Bitdefender, we operate on top of the privilege that we do not have to do a lot of this rote manual work on our signature layer. Instead, we're passing feedback back to our technology teams. And that leaves me on the final slide here for me. Bidirectional feedback is really, really key. One of the things that we pride ourselves on is a really small closed feedback loop, or open feedback loop, excuse me, between ourselves and our labs organization. If you rewind time to around this month last year, we put together a scenario where we said, look, what could we detect if we take something like this, VPN exploitation, moving all the way into data exfil by an attacker? And what we found in our MDR team is our service had two huge blind spots represented by these black bars right here. And instead of looking at that as a core weakness, as something that we didn't want to show our prospects and our customers, instead we hit those things head on and we said, look, product team, technology team, we want to make sure that our SOC sees that data, make sure that we can investigate given that data. And fast forward to today, you'll see, this slide was literally made in October of last year. I'm proud to say that available in 2022 with the XDR network probes, we now have that visibility. So I know there's a lot of text on this slide, but hopefully this gives you a visual representation of the way that we're doing gap analysis internal to the SOC and the way that we're improving our own technologies with that gap analysis and direct pass feedback. Okay, coming to the end here, just wanted to say that, when you're when you're thinking about why in general you want to buy all of these things put together, well, we generally come down to these three things, and it becomes very simple now that we've taken all this time to set it up. The first is that you can see transform of what your team looks like. We found that our customers save about 60 hours in reactive and proactive activities as it pertains to detection and response in the first month. The second is that it might be nigh impossible to ever staff up a detection and response program. That is in the retail world why you're seeing the rise of virtual physical security, right? That because building an in-house function to defend a small business, a medium-sized business, or even up to below the Fortune 50 is becoming nigh impossible. The costs are far outweighing the ability to staff up, a minimal team to do that. And finally, risk reduction. We talk a lot about who owns risk here at Bitdefender MDR and who is the proper owner of that risk. I think I've spoken already to privilege. The fact that we've been able to build a global SOC, we feel it's our duty to be able to offload some of the organizations that we work with in terms of their risk. And we're happy to do so.